Welcome to a brand new masterclass that I'm super excited to start. This masterclass is going to be all about the Nimzo-Indian Defense. Now, the Nimzo-Indian Defense occurs after d4, knight to f6, c4, e6, and knight to c3. And in this position, we play bishop b4. This position is the starting position for this entire masterclass. From here, we will cover practically every option that white has. Now, in this video here, we're simply going to do an introduction when we're going to talk a little bit about the background of this opening. We're going to look at the lines and moves that we are going to cover in this masterclass. And I'm just going to introduce to you this opening and our general strategy in this opening. Now, the Nimzo-Indian Defense is a weapon that has been used for hundreds upon hundreds of years. The first appearance it made was in 1851, and ever since it has been used by the best chess players in the world. We're talking Magnus, Kasparov, Karpov. All these players have dozens upon dozens of games in this defense. And although this opening really peaked in 1970s, it has remained a top weapon in chess and is one of the most classic yet modern openings that we have today. Now, this course is meant to complement the course I already made against e4, where I recommended the Sicilian Dragon, which looked something like this. I made a full masterclass on this position here, and now to complement this against e4, we're now going to be looking at a move against d4, and the Nimzo-Indian, again with knight f6 being the first move, is the recommendation I have. Now, I do want to emphasize that there is other options. They don't have to walk into the Nimzo-Indian. You know, they could play, for example, g3 here and fianchetto the bishop. They could play bishop f4, or even in the next move after c4, e6. Here they can play, g3, or theoretically they could try bishop f4 here. There's a number of options they could play, but we're going to be looking at knight c3, which has just historically at all levels been the most common, the most natural, and the most strong attempt. And so I would put a lot of money that this is the variation that you're going to reach in a majority of your games. You can try to learn some responses to the other options. For example, against knight f3 here, you could, for example, try to learn this move, bishop b4, the Bogo-Indian, and here they can transpose into the Nimzo-Indian. That's one of the benefits, but they don't have to. But regardless, as I mentioned, it's just not as dangerous or venomous as knight to c3, and that's the move that we're going to cover. So bishop to b4, and here is where we're going to look at all of the options they have. So queen to c2 is the classical variation and definitely one that we will spend a good majority of this masterclass looking at. It's one of the most powerful and common. Same thing with e3. This is known as the Rubinstein System, and it's super common, super powerful. We will dedicate a big chunk of this masterclass to learn it. Then there's some other pawn moves. f3 is sometimes seen, a3 is sometimes seen. Very often f3 and a3 are actually combined. There's some bishop moves they could try. Bishop d2 is possible, although not so strong and not so common. Bishop f4 is even less common, and bishop g5 is the better bishop move they have, and we will dedicate a full video for this, but it's not dangerous at all, and we will indeed respond very powerfully to these moves. They can also try knight to f3, which we will cover as well. They can play e4 as well, and queen to b3. Now, if I'm not mistaken, these are all of the moves that we look at, a massive collection of moves that will really make you suited to tackle this position regardless of what they play. I tried to at least exhaust all of white's potential options. Now, before we dive into each one of those individual moves, I want to first tell you about our general strategy, because black can utilize a number of different setups in the Nimzo-Indian Defense. There's a setup where you go for b6, put the bishop on b7, and eventually go for moves like c5 and go for this sort of dark square pawn structure. There's also setups where you go for a more light square approach with d5. Now, generally speaking, we're going to, in an effort to make this masterclass as simple and consistent as can be, I'm going to mostly recommend d5 for a variety and a big amount of the responses that we're going to see from white. I'm trying to make this masterclass really consistent where you don't have to memorize different move orders and different setups for different things. I want to generalize it, and very often that means we're going to play d5. However, there's cases where we won't, and I will explain, I will emphasize exactly why we don't go for d5 in certain cases, but generally it will be because they've motivated us, for example, through the move a3, to take twice, ruin their pawn structure. Here, going d5 doesn't make any sense. We're going to rid them of their biggest issue. Instead, in these sort of setups, we're going to prioritize, and specifically we're going to castle here, but generally for the future of these sort of positions, we're going to play b6, we're going to play c5 to really isolate these pawns and not give them a chance to trade one of them off. And then we're going to target it with bishop to a6, with knight to c6 and knight to a5. And we're going to attack these weakened pawns. But typically, unless they go for this sort of structure, then d5 is going to be our big pawn break in the center. The light square setup is the one that I am typically going to recommend in these sort of positions. But it does, unfortunately, as chess is a very complicated and nuanced game, it does depend on what they play. So let's actually talk about the options they have and the responses we will go for. The first 3 chapters will look at e3. We're going to castle here, and now we're going to look at 3 options that they have, which are the main options. They can play bishop d3, which makes the most sense in my opinion, e3 to open up the bishop and just develop and castle. We're going to play, surprise, surprise, d5 here. This is our big move, again, as I mentioned, that we're going to play. They can also try a different setup. They can go knight g to e2 with the idea of defending this knight, so when they attack us with a3, we're going to take, and then they're going to take back with the knight. This is their plan. Sometimes this means, by the way, that after a3, we're not going to take. We're going to move the bishop back and sort of leave them with this awkward development, because the big thing here is their bishop can't develop. This knight is actually sort of blocking in the bishop. So they're sort of delaying their development and castle in order to defend this knight with a piece. Now we're going to play d5 here, staying consistent. Now the third chapter we'll look at is if they play a3 in this position. So again, 4.e3, we're going to castle, and now instead of bishop d3, instead of knight g2, what if they play a3? Now here we're going to take, and in this position they're going to take, and now we're going to go d6. Again, they have these 2 doubled structure pawns, so we're not going for d5. That's sort of your hint. If we go d5 here, they just take, and what's the point? They no longer have the issues with the weakened pawns. So we go d6, and our idea will be to expand with e5, and our idea will be to put the bishop either on e6 or via b6 to put it on a6 where it attacks the pawn, and the knight will come to a5 like I hinted upon earlier, and this pawn is going to be the key thing that we're going to attack. Now, these are the first 3 chapters. After this, we will look at 3 chapters where they start with queen c2. This is known as the classical system. It's super common and definitely something to know. Now, against the classical system, we're going to play d5 immediately. It doesn't admittedly matter too much. You can castle here first like we did against e3. The simple reason I slightly prefer d5 is because their queen has been dragged away from the center. So if we can quickly open things up and try to attack this weakened pawn, it's going to be advantageous for us. But truly, it doesn't matter much. We're still going to employ a similar setup with castles and d5. Now, we're going to break this up as we did against e3 into 3 options they have. The first is a3. This is by far the most logical. Their idea with queen to c2 was to defend this knight with a piece. So after a3, they can take, and they'll be able to recapture with the queen. We're going to do this anyways, because although their pawn structure is not ruined and they won our bishop, their queen is in the crossfires from moves like knight to e4 and from moves like taking and then going for bishop a6, where you can imagine some attacks along these light squares. Anyways, we're going to castle here, and for the reasons that I mentioned, the queen being not so safe, we're totally happy in this position. The next chapter, chapter number 5, we'll look at what happened if they take in this position instead of playing a3. Now, we're going to take with the queen, and this is one of my more favorite chapters because it's just a really beautiful one. We're attacking the pawn very directly, very confrontational move. And after they defend something like knight to f3, we're of course going to look at many more options in the actual chapter, but just to show you one beautiful idea, we have this idea of going queen to f5 here, where we're trying to hit this queen. If they move away, then their knight is no longer defended from the queen, and we could consider taking. And if they take, our biggest idea, and I'm going to again cover this more heavily in the chapter, is to go for these light squares, where the bishop comes to e6, we have pawn on g6, c6, just all of the light squares are covered, and the knight can come in as well. I mean, really fun positional battle we will have if we go into this line. The final chapter in the classical variation, chapter number 6, we'll look at what happens if they play e3, which is also very logical, defending the pawn with the bishop. Now, against this, we're simply going to castle, leave the tension on the board, and one of the ideas is if they develop, then we can take, force them to lose some tempo, and then perhaps even attack this bishop again and make it even lose more tempo. So again, queen to c2, it's very classical, and you probably will see it a lot, but we have some really fun, exciting, fresh ideas. So those are the first 6 chapters. The first 3 again are regarding e3, the second 3 are around queen to c2, and now we're going to get to more individual moves. So we're going to look at knight to f3 in chapter 7. This is known as the Kasparov system. Now here we play d5. No reason not to. Their pawn structure is not ruined, so striking in the center makes the most sense. Chapter number 8, we'll look at the move a3, which is not so good. Perhaps it's a very natural move to come into your mind, at least sort of immediately, because the bishop is here, let's attack it, but it's not good, because we're happy to take, ruin their pawn structure, and here they just wasted a tempo. And now we're going to go for the very same setups that we had before with castles, and the ideas of going for d6, the ideas of going, for c5, and the knight coming in. Same ideas, playing against these 2 pawns as we did before. I should mention, of course, I'm giving a very brief summary. In the actual chapters for every single one of these videos, we're going to look at many options. For example, for this specific position, we're going to look at bishop g5, we're going to look at knight to f3, we're going to look at f3, we're going to look at e3, we're going to look at a variety of options. So you will definitely be well versed in all of these positions if you follow this masterclass. Now the next chapter is going to be chapter 9. This one is about f3. Now f3 and a3 are very often paired together, and they carry some very aggressive intentions. The idea with f3 is to launch into the center with e4. Therefore, we're going to play d5 immediately and just stop this sort of forcefully. Now, there's many moves again that we'll look at, bishop g5, e3, c takes, and a3. And this is the key that we will focus a majority of this masterclass on regarding the f3 system, this f3, a3 combo. It's just very popular, very common. They're trying to attack from both wings and take total control. So we're going to focus very heavily on how to deal with this. Just to give you a brief intro, after a3, we're going to take, they're going to take, and now we go c5. Now, they have achieved something in one sense where they have the 2 pawns here, but we have kind of played d5. So they did try to achieve something, but the issue is, by doing so, they've wasted so much time. Look, we've developed, we can castle next. They have very hard time developing here. Their knight can't even really get out. They've just wasted a ton of time moving these pawns. So even though we're not going to be able to really target these weakened pawns, we're going to get good control in the center and good time to attack this king through several avenues, for example, through this diagonal here. So this is the one exception where they have the weakened pawns, but we still, have played d5. But because of the reasons I mentioned, we're totally fine here as well. Now, after this, we're going to look at bishop to g5 in chapter number 10. Now, this move here, we're not playing d5. Now, d5 is possible, but I actually find c5 to be a little bit more strong here. The main idea is this. They've sort of abandoned the area over here because they've moved the bishop away. Additionally, the bishop is not defended and it's a loose piece. So we want to use our queen very early on for these two reasons. The weakness here, the queen can come to b6, or the weakness with this knight and with this bishop being loose, the queen often comes to a5 and does some version of a fork here against this bishop and knight. So ultimately, they've sort of abandoned their position here by moving the bishop away. So we're going to strike with c5, try to unstable or destabilize their center, and we're going to develop our queen quickly and try to punish them. So it's again another one of those exceptions where we're not playing d5, but for the reasons I mentioned, it makes a lot of sense and it's a very good, worthwhile investment to go c5 here instead. And we have a lot of fun typically in these sort of positions. Now the next chapter after this will be chapter 11. In this one, we are simply going to cover rare moves that they might throw at you. For example, queen to b3. Not so good. We play c5 here, defend the bishop. There's many ideas. I don't want to reveal them yet, but there's some really fun ideas with attacking this queen here and really harassing the queen and punishing it for coming out so far so early. We're also going to look at what happens if they play bishop to d2, which is super passive. There's no reason to be this passive. We can just castle here and later strike with d5, c5. There's no worry for us whatsoever in this position. We'll look at bishop f4. If they're trying to play something similar to the London system, here we go c5. Very similar reasoning for before. We want the queen to come out and attack this abandoned queenside position, and the bishop is still not so safe, and it is definitely not immune from certain attacks. It's still a loose piece ultimately, and there's just, again, no worries for us here. And the final move that we're going to cover is e4. Now, e4 is a gambit. It carries 0 merit. The idea with it is to go, for example, queen to g4 and try to attack. So there is some logic behind it, but it's just really ridiculous. We're totally fine here. The knight is going to get attacked. There's no worries at all with the king side opening up. It's just objectively refutable in the most in the most pleasant way for us. I mean, we have really no worries in this gambit move e4. And that is mostly it for our moves. We are going to have a 12th chapter where it's going to be a models games chapter where we're just covering everything, sort of combining it. We'll look at all of the ideas that we looked at previously, and it's really just going to be a way for us to sort of accumulate everything that we have learned in the masterclass together. I'm super excited for this opening masterclass. Hopefully you are too. Subscribe if you're new around here and do not want to miss this new masterclass I have for you. Like this video if you did enjoy it, and I will see you next time. Peace out.